For love, Samir chose to stay home and become a full-time housewife. But her husband Derek had found a young, beautiful woman on the side. Samir had no idea her husband had betrayed her. One time, Derek returned from a business trip. Samir deliberately donned sexy lingerie, hoping to be intimate with him, but Derek turned away in disgust, facing away from her. At first, Samir thought her husband was just too tired and didn't think much of it. The next day, Samir went about her household chores as usual. She accidentally discovered an English letter in her husband's pocket. Unable to read English, she had to seek help from her good friend Hella. After reading the letter, Hella told Samir, "Your husband is having an affair." Samir had always believed she married the man who loved her most in the world. For that love, she bore Derek 4 children over 18 years. Upon learning the truth, Samir initially wanted to leave her husband immediately, but the thought of their 4 young children softened her resolve. For the sake of her family, she resolved to pretend ignorance and maintain a facade of peace. But a subsequent incident completely altered her perspective. Their eldest son, John, came home with a black eye after a school fight. Upon learning this, Derek showed no concern for his son but instead blamed Samir for failing to protect him. Hearing this, Samir utterly broke down. All these years, she had single-handedly played both mother and father, pouring her heart into their upbringing. She never imagined her husband would show no gratitude, instead seeking pleasure with his mistress. Samir's long-suppressed anger erupted in an instant. Hearing this, Derek raised his hand and slapped Samir across the face. Samir didn't want to argue anymore. She knew deep down her husband's heart had changed, and there was no turning back. She especially didn't want the children to witness this ugly scene. She turned and ran to her son's room, crying alone. Early the next morning, Derek left the house. He told his lover, Caroline, to wait a few more days. He promised to divorce Samir as soon as possible and then reunite with Caroline in the Netherlands. Derek's mother, Stella, learned of this and was deeply distressed. She never imagined her son would do something so outrageous. All these years, she had witnessed how hard Samir had worked. She immediately called and scolded her son. Then, she considered Samir's position. If Derek's scandal became public, Samir's reputation would suffer too. It was best to resolve this privately and peacefully now. So Stella invited her son home for dinner that evening. It was her granddaughter Alice's birthday. She intended to use this occasion to persuade her son to end his affair with Caroline. Derek listened to his mother's advice without uttering a word. Meanwhile, the younger son, Chris, wanted to draw a family portrait as a birthday gift for his eldest sister, but he couldn't find suitable paper. So he took the letter his mother had hidden away and began drawing on its reverse side. During dinner, everyone chatted and laughed, seemingly forgetting the earlier unpleasantness. Seeing the good atmosphere, Chris hurried back to his room to fetch the gift for his sister. But just then, his sharp-eyed uncle spotted writing on the back of the drawing paper. He immediately read the letter's contents aloud. Derek panicked the moment he heard it. Seeing this, Stella quickly took her eldest son and his family away. Samir remained silent throughout, tears welling in her eyes. Her last shred of strength in front of the children was utterly shattered. Alice couldn't bear seeing her mother suffer so deeply. She demanded her father give everyone an explanation, but Derek adopted the posture of a victim, arguing with his family. He declared he was the master of this household, and no one could question his authority. Chris, terrified by his father's rage, pleaded for forgiveness repeatedly. He believed that if he hadn't taken that letter, none of this would have happened today. Alice's heart ached deeply at her brother's words. She relentlessly accused her father of despicable behavior. Alice's words stung Derek, selfish and hypersensitive. Derek struck Alice across the face, sending her crashing to the floor. John could no longer bear witness to his father's treatment of his sister. In desperation, he grabbed a fruit knife from the table. Today, he would kill his father. Fortunately, Derek acted swiftly and wrestled the knife from John's grasp. Chris stood silently by, bearing a burden of pain unfit for his young years. The family discord cast an inescapable shadow over his childhood. After Derek left, Samir sought out her eldest son, John. She urged him not to let things become so strained with his father. Beside them, daughter Elsa suggested her mother try changing her hairstyle and makeup. Samir's heart, already broken by her husband, was pierced once more by her daughter's words. All these years, hadn't she longed to dress herself nicely? But she was consumed by caring for 4 children. The daily minutiae of their lives had long since drained her of any desire for beauty. After the huge family fight, Derek didn't come home for half a month. This made Chris feel terribly sad. He sought his father countless times in his dreams. Innocent Chris believed his father had truly returned. He hurriedly climbed a stool to open the door for him, but upon opening it, there was nothing outside. He ran back and forth along the street, hoping to welcome his longed-for father this way. Finally, utterly dejected, Chris could only sit helplessly on the steps. Meanwhile, Caroline flew directly from the Netherlands to find Derek. The two shared a candlelit dinner in a romantic restaurant. Chris, having waited all night at the door, fell gravely ill. In the hospital room, he finally saw the father he'd longed for day and night. Derek immediately rose to embrace his wife, Samir. He vowed that no matter what happened, he would never leave this family again. Their relationship also eased considerably due to Chris's illness. Derek even carried Chris home for the first time ever. But after dropping Chris off, Derek left home again. And so, another month passed. Samir didn't want the children to grow up in a fatherless home. After much deliberation, she decided to go persuade Derek to return. However, the moment Samir finished speaking, Derek's mistress, Caroline, approached. In extreme grief, Samir grabbed a fruit knife and stabbed Caroline. Caroline collapsed unconscious on the spot. Samir was horrified by the scene. Derek, determined not to jeopardize his career, forced himself to remain calm as he approached Samir. He told her this was merely an accident and urged her never to mention it was a crime of passion. Otherwise, Samir would face prison for attempted murder. Thus, Samir was taken to the police station. No matter how the officers questioned her, she repeated only one statement. The police had no choice but to question Derek. Derek insisted it was an accident, claiming Caroline was his close friend. Samir had merely accidentally injured Caroline while cutting fruit. Hearing this, the police began to piece together a direction. The most critical thing now was waiting for the victim to regain consciousness. Thanks to the doctor's efforts, Caroline's life was saved. Upon learning of their mother's accident, the children rushed straight to the police station. But they didn't see their mother. They only saw their father, who had been released. From their father, they learned the sequence of events. They couldn't fathom what kind of pain their mother must have endured to find the courage to stab someone. The daughter and mother took turns cursing Derek as shameless. He didn't cherish a good family and had to bring in a mistress. Now, the gentle Samir had been pushed by Derek into becoming a criminal. Unable to accept his mother's arrest, John punched his father. Fortunately, family members intervened, preventing further escalation. Derek specifically sought out Caroline, who was still recovering. He wanted her to tell the police it was all an accident. After securing Caroline's promise, Derek quickly went to see Samir. He told Samir not to worry, that he had everything under control. Once the court proceedings concluded, Samir would be acquitted. But events unfolded differently than Derek anticipated. Caroline unexpectedly hired a lawyer, claiming Samir had attempted to murder her. Under local law, Samir would be sent to prison to serve his sentence, unless the victim agreed to reconcile with Samir. Everyone was stunned by this news. Derek, unable to believe it, confronted Caroline. He shouted at her, demanding to know why she'd done this. Caroline replied that it was all for their love. If Derek wanted to see Samir acquitted, he must sign the divorce papers before Samir's release. When Derek approached Samir to discuss the divorce, Samir was devastated. She refused to simply facilitate Derek and Caroline's reunion. Samir flatly rejected Derek's proposal. Back in her cell, Samir stared blankly at the wedding ring on her finger. All this was observed by the bullies in the cell. They specifically waited until Samir went to the bathroom to beat her up. They also snatched Samir's most precious wedding ring. Samir lay in the bathroom all night. Only when a fellow inmate came to use the restroom did she discover Samir, covered in bruises. To protect herself, Samir told the guards during questioning that she had simply slipped while using the bathroom. Meanwhile, Derek brought his mistress home without even finalizing the divorce. His children witnessed him being intimate with Caroline. John charged forward and grappled with his father, but the young John was no match for his father's strength. The children stood helplessly by the roadside, cursing Derek for his shamelessness. Derek's mother, Stella, unable to bear the shock, collapsed to the ground. Yet Derek remained oblivious to it all. He simply turned and walked home with Caroline. In a desperate move, Chris slammed the front door shut from inside. He refused to let this woman who bullied his mother enter their home. With his small body, Chris braced himself firmly against the door. This was his way of protecting his mother's last shred of dignity. Seeing this, Derek calmly pulled out his keys. Caroline, desperate to please Derek, bent down to coax Chris into compliance. Chris cursed her an idiot before running out. Fortunately, Grandma had always been there for these children. Now, the children could no longer return home. Left with no choice, she took them to stay temporarily at their uncle's house. Alice wanted to beg her uncle to help free her mother from prison, but her uncle's attitude was cold and indifferent, ruthlessly rejecting her plea. He didn't want any connection to Derek's scandal. Hearing this, Alice felt deeply distressed. Since she couldn't rely on others, she had to depend on herself. She approached her close friend Drew and shared her mother's recent ordeal. With Drew's help, she hired a private lawyer for her mother. Thus, the lawyer visited Samir in prison. He happened to see Samir lying in a hospital bed, covered in injuries. Only after the lawyer's careful reassurance did Samir recount yesterday's events. When Alice learned her mother was being bullied in prison, she grew extremely anxious, yet she couldn't offer any substantial help. Elsa didn't want to see her eldest sister so exhausted, so she was also trying to rescue their mother in her own way. To improve her mother's prison conditions, she contacted Owen, a wealthy businessman who had long harbored feelings for her. Owen immediately dispatched his men to the prison, where they dealt with the bullies tormenting Samir. His actions deeply moved Elsa, yet her interaction with Owen was witnessed by her uncle, who happened to be visiting. The uncle couldn't tolerate his niece engaging in such disgraceful behavior in his own home. John couldn't stand his uncle berating his sister, so he slapped his uncle across the face without hesitation. Thus, the four siblings found themselves on the streets once more. Grandma couldn't bear to see the children suffer, so she sent them to stay with Samir's good friend Hella for a few nights. Fortunately, Hella was kind and agreed immediately. Stella ultimately decided to tell Samir about the children being kicked out by Derek, but she didn't mention Caroline being taken back by Derek. She feared Samir couldn't handle the blow and might collapse. At this point, Stella hoped Samir would reconsider and sign the divorce papers with Derek. She had given up all hope for Derek as a son. Samir was deeply conflicted. On one hand, she couldn't bear to part with the children. On the other, she couldn't swallow her pride. After much internal struggle, she ultimately decided to divorce Derek for the sake of the children. Samir flung the wedding ring directly at Derek's feet. Caroline was overjoyed upon learning Samir had finally abandoned the marriage. She promptly signed the withdrawal of charges. Only then was Samir released from the prison where she had been held for days. Returning home full of anticipation, she witnessed a shocking scene. She angrily berated Derek as a shameless man. Derek, his pride wounded, had no choice but to leave the house with his mistress. The children rejoiced at seeing their despised father gone. They danced and cheered excitedly throughout the house. Stella silently wished Samir would leave her son soon. They partied in the living room until late into the night. Just when Samir thought she was finally free, she accidentally spotted the lingerie tucked under the pillow. In that instant, Samir's long-held emotions finally shattered. She released all her pent-up sorrow and injustice in her room to help their mother emerge from the shadow. That night, the family of five held each other tightly. As long as the five of them were together, nothing else mattered. Homeless Derek, wanting to save money, moved straight into his brother's house with his mistress Caroline. Unexpectedly, Derek's brother and sister-in-law welcomed Caroline warmly. They wanted to use Caroline's Dutch identity to boost their own sense of superiority, to be with his beloved forever. Derek took Caroline to buy a diamond ring early the next morning. When Stella discovered her son's shameless actions, she stormed over with Caroline's lingerie in hand. She relentlessly mocked Caroline, declaring she wouldn't let such despicable tactics crush Samir's pride. Hearing this, Caroline immediately played the victim. Sister-in-law Olivia, standing nearby, didn't want her mother-in-law to ruin tonight's romantic atmosphere. She pointed out that Derek had sold his wedding ring to Samir to buy Caroline an oversized diamond ring. Her words successfully redirected the blame toward Derek. After berating her son, Stella packed her bags and left. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Today was the day Samir and Derek were to finalize their divorce. Samir felt a surge of excitement, fantasizing about the freedom of single life. Derek, however, seemed still preoccupied with thoughts of Samir. He couldn't bear to let her go so easily, but their relationship had reached a point of no return. The more Derek dwelled on it, the more distressed he became, eventually suffering a heart attack and being rushed to the hospital. Thus, Samir and Derek's divorce plans were temporarily put on hold. The elderly Stella worried about her comatose son. Samir, however, worried her mother-in-law would struggle alone at the hospital. She had no choice but to accompany Stella to visit Derek. Caroline, seeking to provoke Samir, deliberately flaunted her diamond ring. She ordered Samir to leave immediately. She declared Derek's safety was none of Samir's concern. Stella, witnessing this, refused to indulge Caroline and boldly asserted her own status. After prolonged emergency treatment, Derek's life was finally saved. His family could only watch him through the glass partition. Suddenly, Stella noticed the unconscious Derek calling out Samir's name. Samir stood nearby, silently watching Derek. Several more hours passed before Derek finally regained consciousness. The first thing he did upon opening his eyes was ask the doctor to call Samir. He feared that if he didn't say certain things now, he might never get another chance. Fuming, Caroline reluctantly followed Samir to see Derek. Unsurprisingly, Caroline was promptly ushered out of the room by Derek. Stella, watching from the sidelines, nearly laughed her dentures out. Derek was terrified of dying. In his final moments, he hoped Samir would forgive him for his past misdeeds. He didn't want to leave this world with regrets. Samir had no desire to engage in idle chatter with Derek at this moment. She simply gave a perfunctory nod to his request. Only after confirming Derek's life was no longer in danger did Samir feel at ease taking her mother-in-law home. Yet at this very moment, Derek, who needed care the most, faced a dilemma. Due to work commitments, Caroline couldn't stay to accompany him. Caroline's first act upon returning home was to seek out the boyfriend she'd dated for 8 years. After Caroline's departure, Derek's brother and sister-in-law revealed their true colors. They had intended to exploit Caroline's foreign status to make a quick profit, but before they could profit, they were saddled with Derek as an additional burden. They refused to assist even with Derek's medical examinations. It was the kind-hearted Samir who pushed Derek to the hospital for treatment. She now regarded Derek merely as an ordinary friend. Out of respect for her mother-in-law, she couldn't stand by and do nothing. As Samir was pushing Derek back to his hospital room, they overheard Derek's brother and his wife hurling insults at him. Derek couldn't understand why his own brother had become so cold-hearted. Instead of offering help when he was down on his luck, they were kicking him while he was down. His sister-in-law Olivia, however, brought up the expenses Derek had incurred while staying at their home with Caroline. Hearing this, Derek could no longer contain his emotions. Stella refused to watch her youngest son end up on the streets. Tearfully, she begged Samir to let Derek stay for a few days. She promised Derek would leave once Caroline returned. The soft-hearted Samir, for his mother-in-law's sake, chose to compromise once more. She seemed to have forgotten the pain Derek had caused her. As soon as Samir reached the front door, he saw his eldest daughter Alice, her eyes red and teary. Alice couldn't understand why her mother insisted on bringing her father back home. Just then, Elsa rushed out, overjoyed that her father was willing to live with her again. Thus, under the persistence of her mother and sister, Alice relented. Together, they carried the frail Derek upstairs. The commotion in the living room quickly drew John from his room. He confronted his father, demanding why he had returned to this house. Just as John was about to strike Derek, Samir intervened with her daughter, stopping him. Chaos erupted in the living room. They argued fiercely over whether Derek should stay. Derek gazed at the once happy home now reduced to this state, his heart filled with profound desolation. He ceased his futile struggle and slipped away unnoticed when no one was looking. Chris stood silently by, watching his father's receding figure, utterly powerless. How desperately he craved his father's love. Yet his father had destroyed this family with his own hands. Homeless Derek had nowhere to go. He planned to spend the night on the street. Fortunately, he encountered a kind fisherman. Seeing Derek was extremely weak, the fisherman took him straight home. When the children discovered Derek was gone, they rushed out to search for him. They searched all night long but found nothing. Stella was so anxious her blood pressure shot up to 180. Unable to rest easy, she had no choice but to ask Samir for help searching again. Samir also didn't want to see Derek left to fend for himself on the streets, so she set out to find him. She searched relentlessly for 6 hours. Finally, she found Derek. Seeing Samir, Derek was overcome with emotion, though he no longer loved Samir. After so much time together, he had long considered her family. It was precisely because the novelty of Samir had worn off that he sought a mistress elsewhere. The arrogant Derek refused to admit he still cared about Samir, instead bluntly asking her if she had come looking for him because she still loved him. Samir told him plainly she had come for his mother-in-law. No one cared about Derek except her mother-in-law. She had promised her mother-in-law that before Caroline returned, she would take care of Derek and help him recover at home. After saying this, impatience flashed across Samir's face. Derek was completely enraged. Ignoring his weakened state, He lunged to strike Samir, but in his current condition, he was no match for her. Samir effortlessly pushed him to the ground. She hadn't expected her good intentions to be betrayed by Derek once again. The more Samir thought about it, the angrier she grew. Her gaze fell upon the fruit knife on the shelf. Today, she would take Derek's life. Only then could she completely rid herself of the pain he had caused her. At the critical moment, Derek's friend Aaron arrived. In that instant, Samir made a silent vow: she must divorce Derek immediately. Due to their parents' toxic relationship, their young daughter Elsa suffered from severe emotional deprivation. She had fallen for an older man, Owen, who was nearly her father's age. In him, Elsa found the affection she'd longed for, along with the princess-like life she'd fantasized about countless times in her dreams. Owen's meticulous care intoxicated the inexperienced Elsa. She longed to be glued to Owen every single day. That day, while organizing the wardrobe, Samir was astonished to discover a luxurious gown and an expensive jeweled necklace inside. Samir knew her children well. Her capable eldest daughter, Alice, would never buy such things. The only other possibility was her youngest daughter, Elsa. To confirm her suspicions, Samir promptly took the luxury items to a pawn shop. The outcome matched her expectations exactly. Just as Samir was preparing to return home, she happened to encounter Elsa's friend, Miles. From Miles, Samir learned of Elsa's recent activities. Deeply distressed, Samir confronted Elsa that very night with the jewelry. She demanded Elsa sever all ties with that older man, but Elsa, lost in her infatuation, dismissed her mother's words entirely. Meanwhile, her son John was constantly clashing with classmates at school. Unconsciously, he was even adopting his father's behavior. Just as John felt utterly lost, his music teacher Cindy stepped in to help John overcome the shadows of his family background. Cindy spent every free moment practicing piano with him. She hoped the beauty of music would lift John's sadness. Over time, John developed a special affection for his music teacher. To express his feelings, he even took out his long-cherished guitar and sang a love song beneath her window. But just then, Cindy's boyfriend emerged. John's confession was witnessed by his arch-rival, Brian. Brian immediately reported to the school administration that Cindy and John were involved in an inappropriate teacher-student relationship. Cindy immediately explained to the administration that she was merely encouraging a student struggling with low spirits, but the administration believed she was manipulating an emotionally immature child into a romantic relationship. John, hiding in a tree, witnessed the entire process of the administration bullying Cindy. He leapt from the tree into the office, taking full responsibility for everything. John grew increasingly agitated, tears welling in his eyes. He pleaded with the administration, insisting Cindy was the most dedicated teacher he'd ever known. He confessed his days at school were a blur, deeply scarred by his parents' constant conflict. If not for teacher Cindy's constant encouragement, he might have given up on life long ago. Sadly, despite John's impassioned plea, the administrators turned a deaf ear. John's emotions finally shattered. He summoned every ounce of strength to smash the office to pieces. This act enraged the school administration. Without hesitation, they expelled both Cindy and John. Samir was furious upon learning this. When she rushed home with John's expulsion notice, she witnessed an even more distressing scene. Elsa was openly flirting with that older man right at the school gate. Samir warned Owen that if he continued seeing Elsa, she'd have him arrested. After that, she took Elsa home. Yet Samir's troubles were far from over. Her eldest daughter, Alice, was kidnapped. The social climate at the time left ordinary people struggling to survive. Some young people yearning for freedom and democracy stepped forward. Drew, representing the working class, held daily lectures at the school. Gradually, Alice developed special feelings for him, even knowing Drew was married. It didn't shake her resolve to be with him. Drew and his new wife were merely partners. Their marriage was solely for the sake of the revolutionary cause. There was no love between them whatsoever. The reformist group led by Drew severely undermined the interests of the wealthy. Roger, representing the bourgeoisie, harbored deep hatred for Drew. To destroy Drew, he directly ordered Alice's abduction. Samir, learning of her eldest daughter's peril, was consumed by anxiety. She had no idea how to rescue her daughter from the villains, unable to bear witnessing her daughter-in-law's anguish. After much deliberation, the mother-in-law resolved to seek Derek's assistance, but Derek flatly refused his mother's plea, citing his own illness as an excuse. Meanwhile, Drew was relentlessly working to rescue Alice. He even went so far as to seek help from his romantic rival, Håkan. Håkan had initially wanted nothing to do with Drew, But upon hearing his beloved had been kidnapped, he immediately hopped on his scooter and set off with Drew. Ultimately, with Håkan and Drew's help, Alice successfully escaped the kidnappers. Seeing his daughter return home safely, Derek, who had been lurking in the shadows, stepped out, timely displaying his concern for the child. Standing nearby, Håkan, determined to break up Alice and Drew, blurted out in front of Derek that Drew was already married. Derek couldn't believe his daughter had become someone else's mistress. He felt utterly humiliated. He seemed to have forgotten his own days of running off to seek pleasure with his mistress. Samir couldn't understand why fate had to treat her this way. Alice's current behavior was no different from that of Derek's mistress, Caroline. Though life was bitter, she had to carry on. Today was the day Samir and Derek finalized their divorce. She felt no excitement, only deep anxiety about the future. She had no idea how she would raise 4 children. Fortunately, Derek had shown some conscience by letting her keep the house. Thus, Samir and Derek ended their 8-year marriage. As she stepped out of the lawyer's office, she saw Caroline, her face aglow with excitement. Caroline had abandoned Derek when he needed companionship most. Yet now that Derek was healthy again, she'd rushed back from Holland. Samir felt sickened and just wanted to leave this place quickly, but Derek ordered her to vacate the house immediately. Then, he rushed inside with his mistress, unable to contain his eagerness. He even called the police to evict his ex-wife and children. He showed no mercy, not even to his 80-year-old mother. They were treated like trash, dumped onto the street by the police. Neighbors gathered to gawk, yet not a single soul dared speak up for Samir. The officers even tied John to a gasoline drum. John couldn't understand why his father would treat them this way. This house his father had clearly promised it to his mother. John mustered every ounce of strength to break free, then charged into the room clutching the gasoline drum. He shouted at his father, demanding why he was doing this to him. Seeing his father's silence, John silently pulled a box of matches from his pocket. Amid a fit of maniacal laughter, the match flicked through the air and fell to the floor. Derek, sensing trouble, fled the scene immediately, abandoning his son trapped in the inferno. John was utterly devastated, his will to survive completely shattered. At that critical moment, his mother Samir burst in, cloaked in a cape. Seeing the flames licking at the hem of her skirt, John's protective instincts ignited instantly. He sprinted recklessly toward her. He thought, though his father didn't love him, at least he still had a mother like an angel. Thus, with Samir's help, John survived. But before John could catch his breath, Caroline ordered the police to arrest him. Officers swarmed in to surround John. Samir fought desperately to shield John from harm. Bystanders gathered on the sidelines, expressing sympathy. The officers themselves seemed reluctant to handle this messy family dispute, repeatedly asking Derek if he truly intended to arrest John. Derek, desperate to win his mistress's favor, was willing to turn on his own son. Samir watched this heartless man, overwhelmed by a profound sense of helplessness. Fortunately, John's agile movements allowed him to evade the officers' pursuit. John intended to spend the night in an abandoned house, but his luck ran out when he encountered a gang of thugs. They beat him mercilessly, stealing every valuable item he possessed. To save his life, John ran for his life. He had no idea how long he ran before he found himself standing beneath the home of his music teacher, Cindy. Cindy couldn't bear to see him suffer and brought John into her home. Derek gazed at his house, now reduced to ruins. Without a trace of regret, he turned and checked into a luxury hotel with his mistress. Kind neighbors, unable to bear witness to Samir's plight, generously took in his family. Thus, Samir finally found a temporary refuge. To rescue his eldest son John, who was being hunted by the police, Samir steeled himself against his inner turmoil and went to the hotel where Derek was staying. Derek refused Samir's plea, even informing her he wouldn't pay child support. Hearing this, Samir broke down in tears, abandoning all composure. Yet Derek remained utterly indifferent to her plight, walking away with his mistress. Just as Samir felt utterly helpless, her younger daughter brought her good news. She'd located John's current whereabouts. John was staying safely at his music teacher's home. Hearing this, Samir's heart finally felt a little lighter. Considering the police were still searching for John, Samir had to abandon her plan to see him to avoid drawing attention. Not wanting to burden her friend Hella with a large family, Samir pondered for a long time before deciding to take her family to live in an unfinished house in the suburbs. This drafty, unfinished house was given to her by Derek. Life was tough, but at least the whole family was together. Samir immediately began cleaning the house with the children. Just as Samir and the kids were fretting over the overwhelming workload, Drew arrived promptly with a group of classmates. It seemed that, aside from Derek, everyone Samir encountered was a good person. John had intended to stay at his teacher's house for a few more days. But, unexpectedly, the teacher's boyfriend discovered him. To protect Cindy's future, the boyfriend went straight to the police station to report John. With no other choice, John, still a wanted man, had to return to his mother. Just as Samir was relieved to have John back safely, the police officer who'd been secretly following her arrived. They intended to arrest John immediately. Fortunately, Alice's boyfriend Drew knew the law. They refused entry, arguing the officers lacked a search warrant. The standoff dragged on until nightfall. The officers returned not only with a search warrant but also reinforced by military police. Just as a violent confrontation seemed imminent, Derek sauntered over. He presented Samir with two options: either hand over her younger son Chris willingly, and he would drop the charges against John, or follow legal procedure and have John arrested. Unwilling to endure the agony of separation from her child, Samir rejected Derek's proposal without hesitation. Their entire conversation was overheard by John, who had been hiding upstairs. John silently embraced his younger brother Chris, then descended the stairs with a carefree air. He was willing to accept the punishment of the law, because John had narrowly escaped capture the previous night. The officers handling the case faced criticism from their superiors. This left the officers deeply dissatisfied with John, and that very night, they brutally taught him a lesson. Samir lived day to day, barely scraping by, while Derek indulged in lavish parties with his mistress. Fate seemed determined to torment Samir. This unfortunate soul, her younger son, Chris, suddenly developed a high fever. But the truly heartbreaking news was yet to come. When she visited John in prison, she discovered his body was covered in injuries. She couldn't bear to imagine the suffering John endured behind bars. To secure John's early release, Samir resolved to confront Derek. She decided to hand over her youngest son, Chris, to Derek, on the condition that Derek go to the police station and withdraw the charges against John. She was willing to never see Chris again. Thus, John was released by the police without charges. But John was deeply unhappy about this. He screamed hysterically at his mother. Just as Samir didn't know how to respond, Chris ran over in time. Seeing his brother was safe, John's heart finally settled. He held Chris in his arms, kissing him repeatedly. Only then did John realize he had wrongly blamed his mother. He kept apologizing to her. Samir had no choice but to keep the secret for now, not telling John about Chris's impending departure. Whenever he had free time, John would go to the mountains to chop wood. Time flew by, and before they knew it, the day Samir and Derek had agreed upon arrived. Chris was overjoyed to see his father. The innocent boy believed his parents had reconciled, and that they could still be a happy family. Yet, it was then that his father revealed a cruel truth. Chris rushed to his mother's side. To him, he could live without a father, but he absolutely couldn't be separated from his mother. Seeing this, Samir desperately pleaded with Derek not to take Chris away, but Derek turned a deaf ear. Samir had no choice but to honor the agreement. She held back her grief and handed Chris over to Derek. And so, Chris was forcibly taken home by Derek. The utterly selfish Derek sought to present his best side to Chris. A child's heart is pure. He favors whoever treats him kindly. That's why Derek went to such lengths to bring Chris home. Caroline even specially prepared a children's room for Chris. Though Chris adored this bedroom, he still tightly shut his eyes. He refused to accept Caroline's kindness. He would remember this woman who had bullied his mother for the rest of his life, especially during dinner. Chris faced a table laden with delicious dishes yet showed utter disgust. He would never eat a single bite of Caroline's cooking. Chris was venting his mother's anger in his own way. However, after only a few hours, Chris, still growing, was nearly fainting from hunger. To fill his stomach, he had to sneak leftover rice from the fridge when Caroline wasn't looking. Eating Caroline's dinner filled Chris with guilt. To apologize to his mother, the naive boy crept into the living room late at night and dialed a random number. Derek seemed to feel a twinge of guilt toward the child too. From then on, he hugged Chris to sleep every night. This drove Caroline mad with jealousy. Since his younger brother left, John hadn't slept a single night in peace. He was terrified his brother might be abused by their father. Taking advantage of the noise from the garbage truck, John grabbed an iron bar and pried open the front door. The clatter of the garbage truck perfectly masked the sound he made. And so, John made his way to Chris's room. But the moment he opened the door, He froze. The father he'd always seen as selfish and hypocritical was holding Chris tightly. It turned out Derek wasn't such a bad father after all. Derek slowly opened his eyes and met John's gaze. This time, he wasn't as volatile as before. He didn't get up to hit John. John returned home in a daze. He told his mother about visiting Chris today. He reassured her that his father hadn't seen him ever since the day he was born. Derek's eyes seemed veiled by a shroud. This shroud brutally severed the bond of fatherly affection between them. After Samir left Derek, life became incredibly difficult. He survived each day only through the charity of friends. Ironically, Derek's household boasted not just an advanced bread machine, but also imported dining furniture. Unable to bear seeing her children go hungry and cold, Samir had no choice but to ask her friend Hella to help her find work. Hella not only agreed but also gave her several sets of clothes. Samir was moved to tears by Hella's kindness. Thus, with Hella's help, Samir found work in a wealthy household. Though the job wasn't prestigious, at least she had an income. The wealthy family's son happened to be Elsa's classmate. He had seen Samir a few times. The thought of his classmate's mother working as a maid in his own home excited him. Without a second thought, he shared this news with Elsa's close friend, Miles. Miles, eager for a spectacle, relayed the story to his mother, Olivia. Olivia happened to be Derek's sister-in-law. She had an innate fascination with foreigners. Without hesitation, she told Caroline about Samir's situation. This made Caroline very pleased with Olivia. Early the next morning, Olivia brought Caroline to Samir's workplace. Accompanying them was Chris, the son Samir longed for day and night. Determined to humiliate Samir in front of Derek, Caroline deliberately spilled coffee on the floor, summoning the maid to clean it up. Samir initially thought it was just a routine cleaning job, but the moment she stepped into the living room, she froze in shock. Her ex-husband, with whom she'd shared years of life, stood before her accompanied by his mistress. Her most humiliating moment was witnessed by her young son. Chris whispered to his mother, "Why are you here?" This shattered Samir's pride instantly. Summoning every ounce of strength, she fled the mansion. She couldn't fathom why her ex-husband would humiliate her this way. Seeing his ex-wife in such distress, Derek felt a pang of sympathy. He pulled a wad of cash from his pocket, telling Samir to contact him if she ever needed help. Samir heard him, then flung the money hard into Derek's face. She didn't need Derek's fake affection here. Samir sensed Chris was frightened and immediately regained her composure. She wanted to give her son a big hug, but seeing this, Derek scooped Chris up and walked away. Because of Derek's sudden arrival, Samir lost her job. She returned home dejected, but as soon as she arrived, she was met by her younger daughter Elsa, her face twisted with anger. Elsa had accidentally heard from a classmate that her mother worked as a maid in a wealthy household. This made her feel deeply ashamed in front of her classmates. John had been standing nearby, encouraging his mother. He wanted to go out and work to help ease her burden, but Samir, who valued education, wouldn't allow it. She told John to get his head straight and hurry back to school. Grandmother, watching Elsa's tantrum, couldn't stand it either and scolded her for being so spoiled. Only after the children left did Samir tell her mother-in-law about today's events. Her mother-in-law could only offer encouragement, telling her not to let Derek get to her. Under her mother-in-law's guidance, Samir dressed neatly the next day and visited the wealthy woman's home again. She directly explained her relationship with Derek to the wealthy woman. Fortunately, the wealthy woman was a reasonable person, and she felt deeply for Samir's tragic circumstances. News of Derek's treatment of his ex-wife quickly spread throughout the town. Neighbors were condemning Derek's shameless behavior. Unable to endure the gossip, Derek resorted to threatening those who spoke ill of him with violence. He also earnestly urged Samir to quit her job, promising to provide her with a generous monthly allowance. But Samir wanted no further connection with him, and firmly rejected his proposal. Returning home from work, Samir found her mother-in-law ill. After all these years together, she had long regarded her mother-in-law as her own mother. The next day, Samir went to work early, intending to ask the wealthy woman for an advance on her wages to pay for her mother-in-law's medical treatment. But before she could speak, the wealthy woman approached her with money in hand, settling her wages for the past few days outright. It turned out Derek had threatened the wealthy woman, forbidding her from employing Samir any longer. Thus, Samir lost this hard-won job, returning home to find her mother-in-law weakened. Samir had no choice but to call her two sons. Olivia, ever mindful of her grandmother's pension, was the first to step forward, vowing to take responsibility for her care. This ensured the grandmother would no longer endure days of hunger and days of plenty. Samir grew extremely anxious when her eldest daughter Alice didn't return home all night. She immediately called Leah, the mother of one of Alice's classmates. Leah explained that since it was late and she wasn't home, she had asked her son Drew to drive Alice back. Hearing this, Samir broke out in a cold sweat. She rushed straight to Drew's house, only to find Alice disheveled the moment she entered. In that moment, Samir felt as if the sky had fallen. She couldn't believe her daughter was involved with a married man. That night, Chris accidentally wet the bed, infuriating Caroline. She relentlessly hurled insults at him. Hurt and angry, Chris kicked Caroline hard. Then he turned and ran, nearly getting hit by a car in his haste. Still shaken, Chris was met by Caroline charging at him, who slapped him hard across the face. All this was witnessed by Derek, who happened to be passing by. Derek took Chris to the beach, hoping to distract him, but Chris couldn't muster any interest, only wanting his dad to take him to find his mom. He refused to live with Caroline. Derek flatly refused. When Derek wasn't looking, Chris turned and ran. Unfortunately, he slipped and fell into the sea. Fortunately, a fisherman passing by rescued Chris just in time. After returning home, Chris remained emotionally distraught. He told his mother about his ordeal at his father's house. Samir listened, breaking out in a cold sweat. After a long, hard fight, Samir finally regained custody of his younger son. The kind fisherman, unable to bear seeing Samir struggle, delivered fresh fish to her daily. He even set up a small fish stall for her. Meanwhile, Elsa was kidnapped by bandits on her way to school. Fortunately, a passerby driving by rescued her just in time. When his men reported this to boss Owen, Owen flew into a rage. Having long harbored feelings for Elsa, he wouldn't even let a single strand of her hair be harmed. That very night, Owen led a raid on the bandits' hideout. The next morning, he specifically ordered his men to escort the bandits to apologize to Elsa. Witnessing this scene, Elsa felt immensely satisfied. She immediately rushed to see Owen at top speed. Owen's mature masculine charm utterly captivated Elsa, and their relationship quickly intensified. Owen even specially ordered $1 million gown for Elsa, intending to surprise her that evening. Elsa assumed Owen was going to propose to her, but unexpectedly, Owen actually wanted Elsa to marry his younger brother, Murat. At that moment, Elsa broke down. Through their daily interactions, she had already fallen deeply in love with Owen. In him, she found the paternal affection she had long been missing. She could never be with Murat. However, one incident changed Elsa's perspective. That day, she encountered her friend Miles in the classroom. Miles disapproved of Elsa being with the wealthy Owen, believing Elsa's background was utterly unworthy of him. These words cut Elsa deeply. After dinner that evening, she tried to help her mother clear the table, but her hand slipped, shattering a plate. Elsa's pent-up emotions erupted suddenly. Her family stood silently by, watching her rage. They didn't know what had come over Elsa, only that letting her vent seemed best. Unexpectedly, the next day Elsa packed a suitcase and headed to her father's house. She refused to endure the hardship of living with her mother any longer. She cautiously asked her father if he could take her in. Derek's expression darkened at the suggestion. He wouldn't allow Elsa to stay here, though he loved his daughter. This house was shared with his fiancée, Caroline. He insisted Elsa return to live with her mother. Elsa couldn't comprehend it. If he could bring Chris home, why couldn't he make room for her? All these years, her father had stood tall in her heart. Even after he abandoned her mother, Elsa harbored no resentment. She even believed her mother's lack of self-care had caused her father's infidelity. Only now did she realize her father had always been a selfish, hypocritical man. Elsa sat by the sea for a long time. Finally, she decided to accept Owen's request and marry his brother, Murat. This way, she would never have to endure hardship again. With that thought, she immediately stood up and tossed her suitcase into the sea, attempting to bid farewell to the past in this manner. Afterward, she went to a phone booth to call Owen, composed herself, and returned to the home she loathed. She was giving Owen time to prepare. Driven by jealousy over Samir's closeness with the fisherman, Derek threw a lavish wedding for Caroline that very night at the most luxurious hotel. He intended this as a provocation against Samir. Yet, just as the ceremony was about to begin, Derek dashed home, grabbed a pistol, and rushed out. He tracked down the fisherman, who had just returned from work, determined to destroy Samir's new relationship before the wedding. In his mind, Samir was forever his personal possession. The fisherman swiftly disarmed Derek. Left with no choice, Derek returned to the banquet hall, dejected. Upon learning of Derek's reckless actions, Big Brother Kamal grew deeply concerned. Fearing Derek might cause a catastrophe with the gun, he immediately sought out Samir, urging her to retrieve the weapon as soon as possible. If the fisherman, in a fit of anger, used this gun to seek revenge on Derek, it would be disastrous. To prevent the children from losing their father, Samir quickly tracked down the fisherman. She immediately apologized for Derek's behavior, explaining the gun belonged to Big Brother Kamal and couldn't be lost. She pleaded for the fisherman to return it. The kind-hearted fisherman didn't want to put Samir in a difficult position and obediently handed over the gun. Samir took the gun home to change clothes before heading out, but her strange behavior was witnessed by her eldest son, John. While his mother wasn't looking, John secretly opened the package. What greeted his eyes was a brand new handgun. Startling him, tonight was the very night of his father and his mistress's wedding. Could his mother be planning to use this gun to end his father's life? John grew increasingly terrified. He quickly gathered helpers and followed his mother. The wedding venue was bustling with activity. They finally found Samir in a corner. John immediately opened his mother's bag, intending to take the pistol away to prevent her from doing something foolish. Samir sensed his son's concern and directly told him, "I've already returned it to Uncle." Tears blurred her vision and pulled her thoughts back to 20 years ago. Back then, they had been so deeply in love. Now, Derek despised her for being past her prime. Samir didn't want to linger in sadness, nor risk Derek seeing her. She hurriedly slipped away with the children. Early the next morning, Derek took Caroline off on their honeymoon. To spare the fisherman further harassment from Derek, Samir had no choice but to resign from her fish stall job. She thanked him for his care these past days, but explained personal reasons made it impossible for her to stay. With nowhere else to turn, Samir could only make her family a meager onion soup to escape the misery her mother had brought. Elsa took advantage of her family's distraction and held a simple engagement ceremony with a wealthy young man. Even if he was disabled, she was willing to accept anything to marry into a wealthy family. Tears welling in her eyes, Elsa pleaded with Owen to help her put on the necklace. To avoid arousing Murat's suspicion, Owen reluctantly complied. His brother's dying wish had been to marry his beloved, Elsa. Thus, these two lovers were brutally torn apart by reality. Murat assumed Elsa's tears stemmed from emotion, failing to notice the unusual connection between her and Owen. Derek was overjoyed upon hearing Samir had resigned. He used his connections to secure Samir an easy job, even sending his mother to speak with Samir personally. Thus, Samir arrived at an office building, but the old man never discussed the job details, instead prying into Samir's love life. Upon learning Samir was divorced, he grew excited, even rising to make unwanted advances towards Samir. Terrified, Samir fled the office immediately. As soon as she stepped outside, she saw Derek waiting. Derek kept asking about the interview results, insisting it was a great job he'd worked hard to secure. Samir hurled every insult she could think of, begging him to stop interfering with her career. Derek had previously been hospitalized for a heart attack recurrence, and the doctor had issued him a medical certificate. Unfortunately, this medical certificate reached the company leadership, prioritizing corporate interests. Management promptly terminated Derek. News of Derek's efforts to secure his ex-wife a job also reached Caroline's ears. She loudly berated Derek for his incompetence, arguing that he couldn't even keep his own job yet was meddling in his ex-wife's affairs. Their lives had been thrown into disarray by Derek, leaving them with no savings whatsoever to cover daily expenses. Caroline's words left the arrogant Derek speechless. After much hesitation, he finally decided to look for a job. Caroline appeared at the office every day, impeccably dressed. While Derek faced repeated rejections, no local company was willing to hire him. Meanwhile, Samir found work as a factory worker. Coincidentally, her office was directly across from Derek's. One day, Derek spotted his daughter with Owen. He couldn't fathom how Elsa could be interested in this middle-aged man. He followed Elsa all the way to a remote suburban area. Their heated argument drew Samir's attention as she worked nearby. She feared Derek might act impulsively. Seeing her father assault Owen enraged Elsa, and she abruptly announced her intention to marry. Everyone was stunned by this declaration. Derek's rage only intensified, and he resolved to use force to drive Owen away. At that moment, Elsa spoke again, stating bluntly that she intended to marry Owen's younger brother. Murat. Owen had also made arrangements with Elsa's family to bring his brother over promptly the following evening, so both sets of parents could meet briefly. Samir persistently urged Elsa not to marry at such a young age, arguing that as a high school student, her studies should come first. But Elsa countered by pointing out the age her mother was when she married her father. Samir, hearing this, no longer objected, believing that as long as Elsa and the boy truly loved each other, their happiness after marriage was what mattered. Elsa couldn't believe she was about to marry into a wealthy family and was so excited she couldn't sleep all night. To understand the specifics of the prenuptial agreement, Elsa rose at 5 in the morning to search through documents in the living room. Her mother suddenly appeared, startling her into hastily tossing the papers into the trash. She lied to her mother, claiming she'd only come for a drink of water. The next day, when Elsa tried to retrieve the documents from the trash, she was told her mother had already thrown them out. Elsa decided to have Owen draft a new agreement. Time flew by, and evening arrived in the blink of an eye. To make the house appear less shabby, Samir deliberately brought the sofa out of the bedroom. Derek also dressed up to support Elsa, fearing any shortcomings might invite ridicule from the wealthy. Samir hurriedly took the trash out of the room to dispose of it. That's when she spotted the missing prenuptial agreement in the trash bin by the door. Reading the terms, Samir broke out in a cold sweat. Just then, Owen arrived punctually with his brother. Seeing Murat in a wheelchair, everyone froze in shock. They had imagined Elsa's fiancé in countless ways, but never expected him to be disabled. Owen quickly stepped in to smooth things over and divert attention. Alice went inside to call her mother out. Samir, seeing Murat's disability, was momentarily speechless. Not wanting the awkwardness to linger, Owen directly explained his family situation. His parents had passed away early, leaving him only a vast business empire and his brother Murat. Today, he was acting as a parental figure to propose marriage on his brother's behalf. Samir remained silent throughout, while Derek kept trying to curry favor with Owen. His words grew increasingly emotional, as if he might cry at any moment, even going so far as to beg Owen for a job. Derek's outburst left Owen feeling awkward. After brief pleasantries, Owen signaled to leave with his brother, unable to find common ground with Elsa's family. But Samir called Owen aside, not wanting to hurt poor Murat. She quickly produced the hidden prenuptial agreement, demanding Owen explain what this was all about. Owen refused to elaborate, simply citing mutual consent before leaving. After they departed, Derek, usually prone to stirring trouble, surprisingly offered a rare moment of reason. In Europe and America, spouses signing such agreements is perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with it. But Samir firmly believed marriage should be built on love. A marriage without love was like hell. Growing increasingly agitated, she flung the prenup at Elsa's face, demanding she see the true meaning of marriage. Though her own marriage was unhappy, Samir still cherished the hope for true love. Longing for a sincere relationship in the future, she declared with conviction that Elsa would one day regret this marriage. But Elsa's mind was made up. No one could stop her. The next morning, Elsa rose early and retrieved her identification documents from a drawer. Today, she would secretly marry Murat. Before leaving, she bid farewell to each family member, tears welling in her eyes as if she might never see them again. She then sought out Owen and presented her ID. For his brother's happiness, Owen reluctantly complied with Elsa's demands. Preparations continued into the evening, with many prominent figures invited. Amidst everyone's blessings, Elsa completed the sacred wedding ceremony. Meanwhile, Samir waited in vain for Elsa's return. Suddenly recalling Elsa's strange behavior upon leaving, she sensed something was terribly wrong. Rushing to check the drawer, she discovered her ID had indeed been stolen. Samir immediately stormed into the mansion with her ex-husband and children. Accompanied by investigating officers, she demanded Owen's arrest, accusing him of forcing Elsa into marriage with Murat. But Elsa suddenly burst out, declaring she had gone willingly. Samir urged Elsa to come home with her, but Elsa said she couldn't go back. The wedding ceremony was already over. Derek, watching the scene, said nothing more, only offering his heartfelt wishes for Elsa's happiness. At least his daughter had married a wealthy man. She wouldn't have to struggle for a living anymore. Samir was so enraged by Elsa that she didn't sleep for 2 days and nights. But life must go on. Just as she was fretting over work, she unexpectedly received a job offer from a factory, instructing her to report for duty. She hurriedly dropped off her younger son Chris at her mother-in-law's place, casually mentioning Aaron's name. Unexpectedly, Their entire conversation was overheard by Olivia. Olivia feared Samir might be living better than herself. While having dinner with Derek, Olivia quickly found an opportunity to tell him that Samir had found a new job. Derek couldn't believe that another man was secretly helping Samir. Samir couldn't wait to share this good news with her fisherman friend, but after searching for a long time, she couldn't find the fisherman anywhere. A neighbor told her the fisherman had gone to the nearby cemetery. Samir's legs seemed to have a mind of their own, carrying her involuntarily toward the cemetery. There, she finally saw the person she'd been searching for. Samir was curious what exactly was the relationship between the fisherman and Hassan. With a heavy heart, the fisherman revealed the truth. Hassan was actually his son. Hearing this, Samir froze, unable to process it for a long moment. It turned out this job had also been secretly arranged by the fisherman. Many years ago, Aaron, frustrated by work troubles, often took his anger out on his son, Hassan. Whenever Hassan upset his young wife, Aaron would beat him. Finally, one day, Hassan couldn't take it anymore. He plunged into the swimming pool and never woke up. After that, Aaron completely broke down. He lived in a dilapidated thatched hut, fishing at sea to survive. No one knew his name, and over time, everyone simply called him the fisherman. He believed he would never return to the company for the rest of his life, until one day, while fishing, the fisherman accidentally rescued a child who had fallen into the water. The child bore a striking resemblance to his deceased son, Hassan. This instantly sparked a protective urge within him. After making inquiries, he learned the child was Samir's youngest son, Chris. To thank him for saving his life, Chris even drew a shark painting especially for him. Aaron treasured this painting, hanging it prominently at his small stall. He wanted every customer to see the kindness Chris had shown him. Unable to bear witnessing Chris and Samir's hardship, Aaron tried every means to secure Samir a job, but Derek kept sabotaging his efforts. With no other choice, Aaron dressed formally and returned to that familiar office building. He stayed inside only a few minutes, jotting down Samir's job application details and his signature before rushing out. That's how Samir finally secured this stable factory job. Hearing Aaron's story, Samir felt deeply moved. Derek's mind was filled with images of Samir with another man. While Caroline was out working, he stormed into Samir's workshop and demanded Aaron's office address from the supervisor. But he didn't even catch a glimpse of Aaron. Derek shouted at the men in the office, demanding they bring Aaron immediately. Knowing he couldn't evade it, Aaron returned to the company. Just as Derek prepared to unleash his fury, he froze. Aaron delivered a mere 2 sentences that sent Derek into a panic. Before the powerful, Derek was a whimpering dog. Yet before his family, he turned into a raging beast. He vowed silently to make a fortune, refusing to endure such humiliation in vain. At that moment, a man's appearance was about to alter Derek's life trajectory. This man was Caroline's boyfriend, Akbar. Akbar's background was quite colorful. While in the Netherlands, he and Caroline had colluded to steal 10 million in cash from the company. To protect Caroline from involvement, Akbar had served several years in prison in the Netherlands. After his release, he relentlessly harassed Caroline, demanding she return the stolen money, threatening to report her to the police otherwise. Caroline had no choice but to hand over all the funds. Yet no matter where she hid, Akbar always found her. To conceal her secret from Derek, Caroline lied, claiming Akbar was her distant cousin. But Akbar's ambitions extended far beyond that. He resolved to use his lifetime of knowledge to teach Derek a lesson. One day, while wandering around, Akbar noticed a fishing boat owner planning to close shop for a few days. He immediately rented the boat, paying the owner a hefty sum. Then he went to the market and finally settled on a destitute drunkard as his target. He had the drunkard pose as the fishing boat owner while he himself pretended to be an investor. He planned to use this fishing boat to swindle Derek out of his entire savings. Akbar approached Derek, claiming he had a fishing boat investment opportunity guaranteed to turn a profit. Caroline, standing nearby, tried to stop Derek from doing business with Akbar, but Derek completely ignored her advice. Soon, Derek followed Akbar to the seaside. Akbar claimed they could sell fast food from the boat, arguing the high tourist traffic would guarantee quick profits. Blinded by greed, Derek immediately followed Akbar to the bank to secure a loan. Since he still owned half of the suburban villa he'd previously given to Samir, he mortgaged the property without hesitation. Derek excitedly rushed to his older brother's house to share his plan of investing in the fishing boat with the loan. His family expressed skepticism about his business venture. If the loan failed, the bank would seize his city apartment. Hearing this, Derek stormed out angrily. His mother, Stella, knew her son's temperament well. He would never risk his own home. Could it be he'd mortgaged the very house Samir was currently living in? The more Stella thought about it, the more frightened she became. She immediately sought out Samir and urged her to check the property registry right away. Sure enough, things unfolded exactly as Stella had feared. To achieve his goals, Derek had pushed Samir to the brink. Furious, Samir confronted Derek, demanding an explanation. Derek's temper flared the moment he saw Samir. He took out all the frustration he'd endured from Aaron on Samir. He made Samir remember, Derek only wins, never loses. Seeing Derek like this, Samir had no choice but to leave helplessly. Stella stayed by his side, comforting him, but this arrogant Derek hadn't been gloating for even a few seconds. When the owner of the fishing boat approached with documents, he ordered Derek to leave immediately, declaring the boat his private property. Derek froze upon hearing this. He hastily claimed he'd partnered with Akbar to purchase the vessel. At the mention of Akbar's name, the owner silently produced a document. It was a lease agreement signed between Akbar and him. Only then did Derek realize he'd been deceived. He begged the owner for 2 days to sort things out. The moment the owner left, Akbar appeared before Derek. He intended to celebrate Derek's opening before making his escape. The instant Derek saw Akbar, he threw a punch. Akbar's bag, stuffed with cash, fell to the ground. Caroline seized the chance to transfer the money into her own bag. Just as she prepared to leave, she saw Derek getting beaten. To prevent Derek from getting hurt, she grabbed a stick and swung it at Akbar. Caroline's blow sent both men tumbling into the ocean. Fortunately, Derek was lucky enough to survive, but his partner lost his life in the fall. When questioned by the police, Derek insisted it was nothing but an accident. Fortunately, after an extensive search, the police found no trace of Akbar's body. Ultimately, Derek was acquitted. Then, Samir unexpectedly received a court summons. The document demanded she repay the bank 100,000 yuan immediately, or they would seize her house. Furious, Samir confronted Derek with the papers, demanding an explanation. Derek knew his investment was flawed and deliberately lashed out at Samir with harsh words. Hoping to preserve his pitiful dignity as a man through this tactic, Derek rushed straight to the bank with the documents, hoping the manager would revoke the mortgage agreement he'd signed. The manager nearly choked on his anger upon hearing this. He refused to waste time and insisted on following bank procedures. Derek must repay the 100,000 yuan debt in full, or face losing his house. Derek was at a loss. After much deliberation, he decided to ask his youngest daughter Elsa, who had married into wealth, for money. He fumbled around for a long time, trying to make small talk with Elsa before getting to the point. He said that if Elsa didn't lend him the money, her mother would end up on the streets. After all this, Elsa remained unmoved. She had long seen through her father's character. Derek didn't know Elsa's marriage was a living hell. She spent her days revolving around her husband, with no freedom whatsoever. They didn't even have a normal marital relationship. Owen always understood her feelings and bluntly suggested she might be missing her family. To protect Elsa, he decided to personally escort her home. Murat always followed his brother's lead without question, and so, accompanied by Owen, Elsa reunited with the family she'd longed for day and night. She wanted to do everything in her power to help her mother keep their home, but before she could speak, her mother ruthlessly turned her away. Samir didn't want to waste another word on this rebellious daughter. The bond between mother and daughter seemed to snap completely that day. Derek also felt somewhat guilty toward his ex-wife. He kept thinking of ways to help Samir keep the house. Just when he was at a loss, Caroline said she had a solution. She suggested borrowing money from her wealthy aunt to help Samir through this crisis. Derek was overjoyed upon hearing this and immediately rushed to tell Samir that the money for the house was ready. Time flew by, and before they knew it, the day of the house auction arrived. Fearing Derek might change his mind at the last minute, Samir brought the children along to the auction. Sure enough, things unfolded exactly as she had feared. Caroline had publicly participated in the bidding under her own name. Watching Caroline's maneuver, Derek seethed but dared not speak. After all, as a middle-aged unemployed man, he held the least authority in his own home. The household's financial reins were now firmly in Caroline's hands. Samir stormed over to Derek, demanding an explanation. Derek merely brushed it off, insisting that as long as they kept the house, it was fine. Just then, Elsa made her timely entrance. She immediately bid a higher price, outbidding Caroline. But Caroline didn't seem to care. She was determined to buy this house today, no matter what. The family members behind them watched nervously. They couldn't understand why Elsa had stopped at the critical moment. They didn't know that although Elsa had married into wealth, she didn't have a penny to her name. This time, to help Samir through his crisis, she had deliberately stolen a $1 million diamond necklace from the mansion. Just as Elsa was at a loss, a pair of hands supported her from behind. Elsa looked up to see her beloved Owen had arrived. With Owen by her side, Elsa's fear vanished, and she resumed bidding against Caroline. Upon spotting Owen in the corner, Caroline finally relented. Thus, with Elsa's help, Samir's house was saved. Elsa even made sure to include her mother's name on the property deed. This way, her mother would never again have to endure her father's unwarranted harassment. At that moment, Samir felt a pang of regret. It seemed Elsa's life after marrying into wealth wasn't as miserable as he'd imagined. She hesitated to approach Elsa herself. Just as Elsa was leaving, Samir's true love approached. Turns out he was a hidden billionaire. With the children present, Samir felt awkward, so she asked Aaron to leave first. Later, when the kids weren't looking, she secretly found Aaron, hoping he'd stop bothering her. His appearances had neighbors gossiping about her, but Aaron urged Samir not to overthink it. Derek happened to witness Aaron and Samir talking. He seemed to realize he couldn't compete with the billionaire Aaron. This time, Derek didn't act impulsively like before. He just left quietly. Samir didn't know how to respond to Aaron, so she made up an excuse and left. But Aaron believed it was because he hadn't given Samir enough of a grand gesture that led to her rejection. He drove a $1 million luxury car straight to Samir's workplace, intending to propose to her in front of all the neighbors. Their conversation was witnessed by Derek once more. Unable to endure Aaron's repeated provocations any longer, Derek stormed downstairs without a word and began berating Samir. Samir immediately countered Derek with Aaron's own words. Seeing he couldn't control Samir anymore, Derek redirected his anger toward Aaron. Aaron swiftly grabbed Derek's wrist. Observing the children's reactions, Samir feared they'd oppose her remarriage, and quickly mentioned Aaron's confession outside the company building. But she stated she had no intention of marrying, firmly rejecting Aaron's request. To her, nothing was more precious than her children, but Alice urged her mother to follow her heart, wishing to see Mom start a new relationship. John, overhearing this, turned and walked away. At first, Samir thought John opposed the marriage, but to her surprise, John encouraged Mom to pursue happiness. The next day, Samir looked at Aaron differently. She invited Aaron to meet the children at home, promising to share her answer then. To win Samir's heart, Aaron deliberately shaved off the beard he'd grown for over a decade. Samir waited anxiously in her room for Aaron's arrival. She was filled with anticipation at the prospect of starting a new relationship. 2 hours later, Samir finally saw the Aaron she'd been longing for. The children were overjoyed by his presence. Yet, just as Samir was about to accept Aaron's proposal, an unexpected turn of events unfolded. Derek suddenly appeared and declared in front of Samir that Aaron had killed someone and served time for it. He explained that earlier that morning, he had secretly followed Aaron's butler, pretending to be Aaron's close friend to extract this information. The moment he obtained this intelligence, he rushed over urgently. Hearing this, Aaron had no choice but to reveal the truth to Samir. Feeling unworthy of her, he turned to leave, but Samir called him back. She accepted Aaron's proposal outright. Witnessing this, Derek completely broke down. He fled the scene in a hurry. He couldn't believe it. The woman who had once professed her love for him truly didn't love him anymore. The heavy weight Aaron had carried in his heart for years finally lifted. He no longer had to live in such agony, and could finally bid farewell to the past. At this thought, tears of relief welled up in his eyes. But just then, he spotted a familiar figure. Stepping out, he recognized Derek, the man who had fled in panic moments before. Derek vowed to stop Samir from marrying. He had specifically instructed the courier to deliver a letter to Samir, demanding she come to the docks immediately to meet him, or else he would kill Aaron. Samir rushed to find Derek. The moment they met, she demanded to know what Derek had done to Aaron. Derek sternly ordered Samir to sit down and have a proper talk with him. He had even arranged a romantic private band performance especially for Samir. He intended to do everything in his power to satisfy Samir's vanity. It turned out that just days earlier, Caroline had given Derek the money meant for the house to buy a fishing boat at the docks. Thus began Derek's entrepreneurial journey. However, it's worth noting that Caroline didn't trust Derek at all. When signing the sales documents, she deliberately listed herself as the owner, Derek was merely a worker under Caroline's command. Samir didn't want to waste words with Derek and stood up to leave this trouble spot. But as a frail woman, she was no match for Derek under his coercion. Samir had no choice but to obediently sit back down. Just as Derek pondered how to keep Samir, Caroline unexpectedly approached. She calmly watched the unfolding drama, then produced the documents she held. It was the sales contract signed by Caroline. She had officially sold the fishing boat today. Caroline wanted to see how Derek would support his ex-wife now that he'd lost his means of earning money. Derek broke down upon seeing this. He hurriedly dismissed the band and began arguing fiercely with Caroline. The two fought tooth and nail. Samir tried to slip away in the chaos, but Caroline wouldn't let her leave. Derek calmly walked out of the cabin, locking Caroline and Samir inside. He felt these two women had turned his life into a complete mess. If he couldn't have it easy, then no one would. And so Derek steered the fishing boat out into the open sea. Caroline feared Derek might do something reckless, so she smashed the glass and emerged from the cabin. Samir and Caroline stood beside Derek, pleading with him to reconsider, but Derek refused to back down. He turned the fishing boat around, heading straight for Aaron's dilapidated shack. In Derek's frenzied maneuver, Aaron was buried beneath the rubble. Samir and Caroline were both injured and rushed to the hospital. Fortunately, neither was in critical condition, but Aaron vanished along with Derek. No matter how hard the police searched, they couldn't find either of them. This sent Samir into a panic, terrified that Aaron might be in danger. Elsa was deeply distressed seeing her mother injured. To spare Elsa further grief, Owen personally dispatched his men to search for Derek and Aaron, but after searching all night, they found nothing. Meanwhile, Derek was carving a wooden stick with a knife, intending to fashion a sharp weapon to torment Aaron. Just as Derek was about to act, Owen's men arrived. Derek locked the door tightly, barring anyone from entering. Today, he was determined to take Aaron down with him. Then Aaron revealed that Samir had already rejected his proposal. It turned out that days earlier, Samir had intended to visit Aaron at the mansion for a date, but accidentally encountered Aaron's ex-wife, Selma. Selma was still clutching their wedding ring tightly. This scene was too much for Samir to bear, forcing her to decisively end this budding relationship. Derek was overjoyed upon hearing this. He immediately had his men relay a message to Samir, demanding she come personally to clarify the matter before he would release Aaron. Samir rushed over in a panic, confessing before Derek that she had indeed rejected Aaron's proposal. Only after confirming Aaron was safe did Samir leave with relief. Derek was reported by the boat owner for vandalizing the fishing vessel. He was forced to flee. After wandering for an unknown duration, he found himself beneath Samir's apartment building, surveying his utterly ruined life. A terrifying thought suddenly seized Derek. He would use his charm to win Samir back. Only then could he return to their earlier, happier days. So Derek broke into Samir's home while the children were away. Samir felt so sick she could barely breathe. She couldn't believe Derek could be this shameless. The nauseating stench emanating from Derek left her unsettled for a long time. Derek, who had done wrong, ran to his mother like a child who had misbehaved. He regretted his actions and hoped his mother would forgive him, but his mother simply picked up a book and held it to her face. In her eyes, Derek was utterly unworthy of being her son. Samir cried in bed all day. Only when the children returned from school did they notice something was wrong. Seeing his mother covered in bruises, John couldn't hold back any longer. Furious, he punched Derek. This time, Derek acted unusually. He didn't fight back, just stood silently, as if awaiting fate's judgment. John thought his mother had only suffered his father's violent beatings, so he wanted his father to taste the pain she endured. If John knew the truth, he probably would have killed Derek. Seeing his father offer no resistance, John felt utterly devastated. No one dared intervene, all silently watching from the sidelines. Finally, John himself couldn't bear it anymore and stopped, giving Derek a chance to leave. Stella quickly went with her grandson to visit Samir. They called out loudly for Samir at the door. Just as John was about to break it down, Samir emerged from the bathroom. Her eyes were vacant, her expression dazed. Her entire being seemed mad. Seeing her like this, everyone felt profoundly saddened. After hours of gathering herself, Samir finally resolved to face everything head-on. Silently, she changed into fresh clothes, clutching a knife tightly in her hand. Today, she would end Derek's life, drawing a final line under their misguided relationship. Derek sensed Samir's hesitation and swiftly grabbed the dagger, pressing it against his own chest. Just as Samir was about to strike, the police who had been pursuing Derek arrived. Thus, Derek was taken to the police station on suspicion of property damage. Caroline, however, demanded Derek sell the property under his name to her, promising she would help him get out of jail only if he did. She intended to strip Derek of everything, leaving him penniless. Only then would Derek lack the means to harass his ex-wife. But Derek flatly rejected her proposal. That house held too many memories for him and Samir. He couldn't abandon it for his freedom. Thus, Derek ultimately received his just punishment. During Derek's incarceration, Samir and Aaron reunited. Samir genuinely cherished this gentle, considerate man. Everyone had made mistakes in the past. Aaron had lost his son when he was young, blinded by beauty. And hadn't Samir herself been swept away by love, falling for that scumbag Derek? Samir had believed time would gradually fade those painful memories. But then, she suddenly experienced morning sickness. She rushed to the hospital for a full examination. The results confirmed her worst fears: she was carrying her ex-husband's child. The realization left her breathless with anguish. She pleaded with her mother-in-law for help. Stella had no choice but to visit the prison and deliver the news to her son. Derek was overjoyed upon hearing it. He demanded Caroline use all her savings to bail him out, promising to transfer his property to her. Caroline had always planned to seize Derek's house, believing only then would Derek obey her forever. But just as she prepared to rescue Derek, Akbar suddenly appeared. It turned out Akbar wasn't dead at all. He threatened Caroline with a gun, forcing her to take him to the hotel. With Akbar's interference, Derek missed his best chance for bail, and Caroline was confined to the hotel. After much deliberation, Samir ultimately decided to terminate the pregnancy. She couldn't continue entangled with her ex-husband. She resolved to live for herself this once. But just as Samir was about to leave, she unexpectedly encountered Derek. It turned out that earlier that morning, Owen, unwilling to see Elsa distressed, had secretly bailed Derek out of prison while she wasn't looking. Derek earnestly pleaded with Samir to keep the baby. Samir looked at his ugly face and felt nothing but disgust. Just as Samir was breaking down, a man emerged from the warehouse. This man was none other than Alice's boyfriend, Drew. It turned out that a few days ago, Drew and his mother had been targeted by right-wing extremists during an event. His mother had fallen in a pool of blood. Protecting him, Drew had investigated extensively and finally narrowed his suspicions to MP Ikram. He pulled the trigger without hesitation. Fortunately, Drew's aim was off, and Ikram narrowly escaped with his life. After regaining consciousness, Ikram launched a frenzied campaign of revenge against Drew. With nowhere else to turn, Drew sought refuge with his girlfriend Alice. Hearing Samir's agonized screams, he emerged from the warehouse. Thanks to his intervention, Drew slunk away in defeat. Samir was grateful to Drew and invited him to stay at her home. Drew was discreet, keeping all overheard conversations to himself, so the family remained unaware of Samir's pregnancy. As time passed, Samir's belly grew increasingly noticeable. To avoid suspicion, she deliberated and ultimately decided to terminate the pregnancy. Accompanied by her mother-in-law, she went to a small clinic. But just as Samir was about to undergo the procedure, Derek suddenly appeared, taking her to the home he shared with his current wife. Derek desperately pleaded with Samir to give him another chance. Yet Samir remembered clearly how Derek had kicked them out of their home for his mistress. She remembered how she had humbled herself, begging him for child support just to feed the children. Derek had committed too many wrongs. There was no going back between them. Enraged by this, Derek slammed the door shut. From now on, Samir would live confined to this bedroom, and no one would take her away from him. Unable to bear witness to Samir's misery, Stella pleaded with her son to release her. Drew grew deeply concerned when Samir failed to return home for an extended period. After extensive inquiries, he finally tracked Samir down. Without a word, Drew attacked Derek, seeking to avenge his girlfriend Alice. Fortunately, neighbors intervened in time, preventing serious injury. Derek felt embarrassed by the commotion. As neighbors gathered at the door, condemning his absurd behavior, Stella seized the moment to demand the house keys from her son. Thus, with his mother-in-law's help, Samir regained his freedom. Meanwhile, a group in the corner kept a close watch on Drew. They followed him all the way to the suburbs. Because of his intervention, Drew was captured and taken back by Ikram. Alice wept uncontrollably behind him. In prison, Drew endured brutal beatings from guards daily. Ikram planned to secretly end his life. Unexpectedly, Ikram's son Hakan learned of this plot. Hakan, the man who had relentlessly pursued Alice, would never pass up this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He confronted Alice directly, stating his terms. If Alice married him, Drew would be spared. Alice felt utterly hopeless upon hearing this. But for Drew's sake, she ultimately chose to sacrifice herself. She agreed with Hakan that she would discuss the matter with her family after some time. Derek constantly professed his love for Samir, yet his heart yearned intensely for his current wife, Caroline. Just as his worries deepened, he unexpectedly received a call from Caroline. She explained she'd encountered trouble at a hotel, and only Derek could resolve it. Derek rushed to the hotel immediately, yet there, he witnessed the very scene he dreaded most. Before he could react, Akbar seized him. Seeing Derek, Akbar grinned with satisfaction. He had deliberately lured Derek using Caroline. With Derek in his grasp, Caroline would surely withdraw all her savings. Unable to bear witness to Derek's death, Caroline reluctantly withdrew the remaining savings from the bank. But before entering the hotel, she secretly called Akbar's creditor. Thus, the money Akbar had extorted was ultimately recovered by the creditor. Instead of being grateful for Caroline's life-saving act, Derek found himself missing his ex-wife Samir even more at this moment. He silently vowed to win back his ex-wife and drive the despicable Caroline away. He began lurking daily along Samir's commuting route. To permanently extinguish Derek's hopes, Samir returned to that clinic. But a momentary error by the clinic owner caused Samir to hemorrhage severely, collapsing unconscious on the spot. His mother-in-law, terrified by the sight, rushed Samir to the hospital. At a loss, she had no choice but to call Derek. This time, Derek unexpectedly took on the role of Samir's caregiver. Meanwhile, in another corner of the hospital, John was tending to his beloved teacher Cindy. Cindy had fallen gravely ill. Doctors gave her no more than a month to live. Cindy's husband, Sadat, was a philanderer, which devastated the lonely and helpless Cindy, leaving her with no one to confide in. She had planned to quietly await death at home, but then received John's caring message. This broke her resolve. With John's help, Cindy was admitted to the hospital. John rushed to the hospital whenever he could, doing everything in his power to support her. But after undergoing intense chemotherapy, Cindy began losing her hair in large amounts. This utterly devastated her, who had always cherished her appearance. John held her tightly in his arms. Once, it was his teacher who encouraged him and gave him confidence. Now the roles were reversed, and it was his turn to protect the vulnerable Cindy. They cried for a long time in the hospital room. Every time Cindy wept, John's heart ached. Hours later, Sadat reluctantly arrived at the hospital. He was about to lash out at John when he noticed the floor strewn with Cindy's hair. Unable to bear the sight, Sadat immediately fled the scene. Worried that his hair loss would trouble Cindy, John pondered for a long time before finally persuading her to cut her hair. With tears in her eyes, Cindy bid farewell to her beautiful locks. John learned from Cindy that she was an orphan. Since childhood, she had dreamed of visiting an amusement park, but this dream seemed impossibly distant. At the orphanage, she never had the chance to go out and play. John took advantage of the doctor's absence to sneak Cindy out for an entire day at the amusement park. There, Cindy could be a happy little girl forever. But Cindy's condition worsened. No matter how hard John tried, he couldn't cure her. When John stepped into the hallway, he unexpectedly spotted his grandmother. A sudden sense of foreboding washed over him. After some questioning, he learned his mother had been hospitalized due to severe bleeding. John tried to enter the ward to see his mother but saw Derek instead. He immediately wanted to teach his father a lesson. His grandmother quickly stopped him, explaining Derek had come today to save Samir. If Derek hadn't donated blood, Samir might not have survived. John reluctantly held back and hurried to notify his siblings. Aaron, the billionaire who had long harbored feelings for Samir, also arrived. Meanwhile, in a corner hidden from their view, Caroline had deliberately gone to the office to inquire about Samir's condition. From the doctor, she learned that Samir was pregnant, and the hospitalization was due to the hemorrhage. Caroline was overjoyed upon hearing this news. In front of everyone, she announced the fact that Samir was pregnant. Everyone was stunned, their eyes immediately turning to Aaron in the corner. Aaron, unwilling to be falsely accused, desperately defended himself. He claimed he had never crossed any boundaries with Samir, but he didn't mind that Samir was carrying someone else's child. Derek immediately interjected, "Samir is carrying my child." At this revelation, everyone was on the edge of their seats. John was so shocked he stumbled backward. The children trembled with rage at Derek's shamelessness, and John wanted to strangle him right then and there. Suddenly, Alice remembered spotting her father acting suspiciously on her way home from school 2 days prior, combined with the image of her mother sobbing uncontrollably in her room. She finally understood what had happened that day. To spare Samir further humiliation, they all left immediately. The moment Elsa returned home, her husband unleashed a torrent of harsh words. Murat had long suspected Elsa and his brother shared an unusual bond, and he confronted his brother on the spot. Owen repeatedly assured his younger brother he would never appear before them again. Late into the night, Samir, who had been unconscious for hours, slowly regained consciousness. From her mother-in-law, she learned the children knew about her pregnancy. This made her wish she could leave this world immediately. Aaron couldn't bear witnessing Samir suffer such humiliation. He immediately pulled a pistol from the drawer. Today, he would settle the score with that bastard Derek and avenge Samir. Selma overheard Aaron and Derek's entire conversation from the corner. She rushed to Samir's house in her car, urging her to stop the impending tragedy. Upon receiving this critical intelligence, Samir rushed to the scene at breakneck speed. At that moment, the two men stood locked in a tense standoff, both fighting for Samir. Just as the situation reached its breaking point, Caroline arrived. She immediately produced her pregnancy test results, demanding Derek see them clearly. She was pregnant too. Derek reluctantly holstered his gun and left the scene with Caroline. After composing himself, he returned to Samir's home. He pleaded hoarsely with Samir to terminate the pregnancy. He insisted their relationship was doomed from the start and urged Samir to let go of the child. Summoning her courage, Samir went to the police station with Alice to file a report. She revealed Derek's rape of her, demanding the police punish him, but she underestimated Derek's ruthlessness. Derek flatly denied every despicable act he'd committed. When Samir returned to the station, the police released Derek due to insufficient evidence. Derek maintained his innocence throughout, and crucially, there were no eyewitnesses. To get back at Derek, Samir decided to marry Aaron. Selma even put on elaborate makeup to visit Samir, sincerely wishing her happiness with Aaron. Now that she'd regained her sanity, she was ready to leave this hellhole that had trapped her for years. Packing just a few belongings, she moved to another city. Meanwhile, John delivered a radio to Ms. Cindy. Tonight marked his important performance alongside local celebrities, and he hoped Ms. Cindy could hear this beautiful song, which might help her condition. Before taking the stage, John specifically acknowledged Ms. Cindy. His voice seemed enchanted. Every listener found themselves inexplicably moved to tears. Perhaps they were touched by John's singing. The moment the concert ended, John rushed to the hospital, eager to share the day's joy with Cindy. He recounted many amusing stories, hoping she would recover soon. But Cindy's condition was too severe, and she ultimately left this beautiful world. At Cindy's funeral, John wept like a child. Everyone offered their condolences, while Sadat stood in a corner, as if none of it concerned him. Elsa had also lost the love of her life. Owen, to avoid affecting his brother's condition, had to leave for Paris. Elsa intercepted him on his inevitable path. Before his departure, she threw herself into Owen's arms, but after the brief passion, they still had to face reality. Elsa and Owen were destined to be apart. Had Owen been more selfish back then, refusing to support his brother, perhaps they could have found happiness together. After everything that had happened, Samir felt awkward telling her children about her upcoming wedding. She feared they might resent her, but the opposite was true. Everyone was delighted she had found a life partner. They didn't blame their mother for her own romantic struggles. A mother deserved the right to enjoy her own life. Downstairs, the children bustled about preparing for Samir's wedding. Neighbors from miles around came to congratulate her. Hella even volunteered to handle Samir's makeup and styling. Under her skilled hands, Samir transformed into a stunning beauty. Though the dress was simple, it couldn't conceal Samir's radiant beauty. The children never imagined their plain-faced mother could be so stunning. Aaron stood frozen for over 10 seconds before realizing this was his bride. Thus, with just a simple table and a pastor, Samir completed this major life event. The wedding celebrations raged from day into the night, with people singing, dancing, and sharing in the joy. But then, an uninvited guest burst in. Derek couldn't bear the thought of Samir marrying another man. Without hesitation, he fired at the groom. Before the newlyweds could begin their married life, the groom departed this world prematurely. Next, Derek aimed his gun at Samir, determined to take her with him today. Just as Derek was about to strike, a piercing gunshot rang out. Everyone assumed Samir would meet the same fate as Aaron. But then, the situation took a dramatic turn. The bullet didn't hit Samir. Instead, It struck Derek as he raised the gun. Behind Derek stood his mother, Stella. Stella could no longer bear watching her son destroy Samir's happiness. After all these years together, she had long considered Samir her own daughter. When she needed companionship most, it was Samir who tirelessly cared for her. When she was sad, it was Samir who found ways to cheer her up. Love is mutual. Sometimes, what's lost is truly lost. Obsession and the urge to control will ultimately destroy oneself and drive away those who love you.